When you look up the word melody in the dictionary, it's defined as a sequence of single notes that is musically satisfying. And I guess the Broadway melody is exactly that, in the sense that it is pleasing to the eyes. I think that if anything, the Broadway melody was a movie that was meant to showcase the talents of people who have trained for years to become good at what they do, like dancing, singing, or playing an instrument. This was clear in scenes where we watched girls doing a combination of tap dancing or ballet, or another scene where we saw a trio of girls that were able to do the splits. This was technically the first complete Hollywood musical. One thing that I like that was said about this movie was what James Bernardinelli had to say about this movie. Some deficiencies are the result of the studio's validated beliefs that viewers would be willing to ignore bad acting and pedestrian directing in order to experience singing, dancing, and talking on the silver screen. Now, of course, the acting in those days was not the best, but that was to be expected. Bad directing, maybe. One thing that was weird to me was that this movie starts and ends in a rather unique way. In terms of cinematography, that is. Because the movie starts out with a bird's eye view of the city, which I imagine must have been harder to film than most people think, since this movie came out in 1929 and helicopters weren't invented until 1939. And I think the last shot of the movie was of Times Square or something, but the rest of the movie he used captions to tell the audience where the characters were at. There was barely any use of establishing shots in this movie. Now I do want to talk about the story. The story is the worst part of this movie. I don't understand why they had to make some soap opera style story, because, let's be honest, the whole love triangle thing that happened between Queenie, Hank, Jacques, and Eddie should not have been the focus of the story. And here's why. Because the love triangle story started to get really stupid. Eddie started hating Jacques Warner before he even knew the man's name. Then there was the scene where Hank walked in on Eddie when he was coming on to Queenie. I thought Hank was going to explode on them, but I guess the writers of that era didn't like making people feel uncomfortable while they were watching a movie back then. So that's why they gave themselves an easy way out that was inconsistent with what was going on earlier in the movie. Hank said that she would never marry Eddie even if he was the last man on Earth. But weren't you kissing him earlier as though you loved him? I don't know, it's just weird. And the second reason is because they could have made this movie about the Mahoney sisters trying their best to get a part on a Broadway musical. How? I don't know. I guess they could have had the Mahoney sisters acting like little brats towards the Zanfield dude or whatever. Or they could have gotten sued for assaulting one of the other dancers for getting into a scuffle with one of them. Something along those lines. Now, I want everyone to keep this in mind. I'm not criticizing this movie for being old. I actually love watching old movies. And just because a movie is old, it doesn't mean that I don't like movies from the Precode classical era. The movie Metropolis is an absolutely fantastic movie that's earned its spot on my own list of top 10 movies. My film history teacher told me that movies are good based on whether or not they survive the passage of time. Consensus and perspective are needed in order for a movie's flaws to come out, and that's true. The Broadway Melody has not survived the passage of time, despite the fact that it won the Oscar for Best Picture, and was technically the first musical ever. I was absolutely bored to tears within the first few minutes of watching the Broadway Melody, and it took me 2 weeks to finally sit my ass down and watch the rest of it. That's bad. The Broadway Melody gets 2 stars out of 5.